back to TalkNorth.com. Thank you for listening. If you can, please download before you listen. It helps our business. I'd also like to thank our producer, Brandon Morton, and let you know if you'd like to sponsor this program or any of the programs on the network, you can reach me at jsouhan47@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Viking Update Show, starring Tim Yotter, publisher of Viking Update. I'm Jim Souhan from the Star Tribune. This is one of our 2 Viking shows on the network. Tim and I have both been covering the Vikings since the early to mid-'90s. We've seen a lot, and it's always been fascinating. We also have the Jeff Diamond Show on the network. Jeff Diamond's the former Vikings general manager. Check out that show as well. It's a nice compliment. It's more from the owners and executive suite. This is ground-level reporting and perspective. Thanks to our sponsors, Twill and the Edina Galleria, SodaStick.com, the really cool local apparel company, Tony Hoaglund, your State Farm agent in Champlin, and Bite Squad, BiteSquad.com. Let's get into the OTAs now that they are halfway through. And while nothing that newsy actually happens on the field during OTAs, if you pay attention, there are always some interesting developments. Let's start off with the headline, solving some tight binds. Take it from there, Tim.
Yeah, well, to me, when the Vikings entered the offseason, there were a lot of issues that they had to get figured out. Number one was offensive coordinator, eventually settling on Kevin Stefanski. But I found it really interesting that, they paired Stefanski, who only had 3 games of coordinator experience at the end of last season, with Gary Kubiak, who has a couple decades of experience calling plays and designing schemes in the NFL. But kind of the forgotten guy in all of this, to me, is Rick Dennison, the offensive line coach, who has been an offensive coordinator when Gary Kubiak was a head coach, and who has spent a lot of time coaching offensive lines under Gary Kubiak, whether Kubiak was a head coach or whether Kubiak was the offensive coordinator at different stops, mainly Denver and Houston. So I think what Mike Zimmer did in pairing Stefanski with Kubiak and Dennison is really going to go a long way because, I think that Zimmer likes what Stefanski brings. I think Stefanski is very open to ideas and working with other people and new concepts and all of that. And I think you have Kubiak, who, while he's a very respected schemer and an offensive coordinator, I don't view him as a power-hungry type of guy either. So I really think that this should be a very good working relationship after last year, which is a complete contrast to last year, where you had basically Zimmer and DiFilippo and their philosophies not really matching up. And I put that on Zimmer as much as I put it on DiFilippo, because I think Zimmer realized at some point during the season, well before he ended up firing DiFilippo, that he probably didn't do a good enough job really vetting philosophy. And Zimmer talked about that early this offseason, that he needed to do a better job of that. So I think the pairing of a younger Stefanski, who has, a couple of decades of experience, well, a decade and a half of experience anyway in the NFL, but not a lot of experience as a coordinator, going with guys who are very experienced in that area.
It's going to be fascinating because, no matter how nice or balanced a human being you are, if you're in that business, you do have an ego. And, Kubiak has won a Super Bowl. Dennison has been his right-hand man on a Super Bowl winning team, one of his right-hand men. Stefanski's trying to launch his career. I do not see any problems with any of these personalities or these people working together. But even the nicest people are going to have disagreements, and how they resolve a disagreement during the pressure of a season could be the key to the season.
Well, and the other interesting thing, you hit it on that, because last offseason there were a lot of good things said about DiFilippo and what he could bring to the offense as well. I just think that philosophies match up really well here. I think Stefanski is much more open to getting it closer to a balanced offense than DiFilippo was, and I think that is also going to help the offensive line. But to me, the most interesting dynamic will be how much influence in game does Kubiak have? Because I envision Stefanski being down on the field, maybe working with Kirk Cousins a bit, and when the defense is out on the field, him sitting down with Cousins on the sideline and Kubiak in his ear. But are there ever times when Kubiak is going to say, "Look, I've been here, and this is what you need to do"? And how does Stefanski handle that if that ever happens? I think it's going to be a much better relationship than, Kubiak trying to force his ideas down Stefanski's throat. I think, ultimately Stefanski realizes what Kubiak, they've spent enough time this offseason together that they get a feel for what each of them wants to accomplish and how that can be done. And so I see it as a good relationship, but you never know if things, are stressful, go off the rails. How do they handle that stress, and how do they work together to get through it and turn things around if they need to be turned around?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And here's another wrinkle. When we talk about offensive balance, I think there are two different ways to look at offensive balance, and one of them is really old school and limiting, and the other is really liberating. The old school way is balance means you're going to run and throw about 50% each, and you're going to try to run and throw about 50% each as long as you're in a normal game flow in each game. And I think that's really limiting. I listen, I don't want to god up Bill Belichick, but the thing I probably like more about Bill Belichick and his philosophies than anything else is he never gets caught in a philosophy. He does what's going to work best at that moment and in that game and in that situation. And if that means throwing it 50 times, he's going to throw it 50 times. If it means running it up the middle 12 times in a row, he's going to run up the middle 12 times in a row. I hope they don't get caught in the old school, you got to run it a lot and throw it a lot every game, and you got to mix it up, pass, run, pass. You need to do what's going to work in that game, and then you need to have the capability that if a defense overreacts to stop one thing, you can do the other.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think the prime example of that was last year. I'm having a hard time remembering exactly which game, but the Vikings. DiFilippo at this point, it was, halfway through the season probably. And DiFilippo at this point had clearly been told, we need to run the ball more. We need more balance on the offense. We're putting Cousins in the offensive line in a bad situation. And there was a game where Dalvin Cook was averaging, I think, 8-9 yards a carry, but he hardly saw the ball. And it made absolutely no sense to me why you wouldn't run more in that situation. Now, early in the season, the passing game was clicking, everything was going great, and maybe that was partly a function of new offensive coordinator, how is it going to look with the Vikings, and eventually teams sort of figuring out, okay, here's what their passing game is about. And by the time you got to midway through last year, I think everyone that was facing the Vikings knew, look, they are going to pass 75 to 80% of the time. So we don't have to be that concerned about the running game. And I think that really puts an offensive line, a quarterback, any running back that's trying to pick up protections in a really bad spot. And so if I agree with you, there could be games where they still throw it 75, 80% of the time. If that's working, that's great. But if you are having a hard time protecting, then you need to run it better. You need to run more play action. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest differences this year is how they run play action, how often they run play action, and trying to keep defensive linemen and rushing linebackers off balance with what's coming at what time during a game.
Absolutely. I've been wearing my Stenstrom casual shirts, short sleeve shirts, my summer shirts that I got at Twill lately. I bought really high-end Stenstrom like dress shirts. The rare occasions I wear a suit. Johnny O, Peter Millar, Brax pants, the most comfortable pants I've ever worn. Check out Twill in the Edina Galleria. They have so much great stuff for summer.
Jim usually doesn't like to shop for clothes. I don't like it when he shops for clothes either, because he used to buy stuff I'd want to throw out. That's why I'm so glad he's found Twill in the Edina Galleria. He likes shopping there because of the comfortable environment and the friendly staff. He finds clothes that actually fit him properly and are high-quality brands that will look great for years, whether he's golfing or working. Our favorites so far are Peter Millar, Johnny O, and Barber. We spend our money at Twill because we love the clothes and we love the no-pressure shopping. Drop by Twill in the Edina Galleria for the best shopping experience and best clothes you'll find in the Twin Cities.
And do you have a sense of Dennison as like a personality? Sometimes offensive line coaches are the greatest characters in the world. Do you have a sense what kind of guy he is?
I do get the sense that while he is a fairly smart guy, he was an engineer by trade that got into this. I think he's also a little bit of a hyper guy. Just watching him work with some of the offensive linemen, he's a high energy guy, I guess is the way to put it. He's not, a laid back. Who was the offensive line coach that the Vikings had that I think he went to the Colts. He was much more laid back.
I remember who you're talking about, but he didn't make enough impression for me to remember his name right now. I don't think.
Yeah, well, and some offensive line coaches I think are just more laid back, more studious, soft talkers. Others are hyper. I think Dennison borders on that intense, hyper guy. Just watching him work in practice, but there's also timing involved. We talk sometimes about head coaches when a franchise moves from, say, a Brad Childress, and then they go to a Leslie Frazier, and they just do a complete about face and personality of head coach. I think if you have an offensive line coach that can take on the personality that is needed at that time or at that season, I think there is a certain amount of, hey, you need to snap to attention here. Because last year, that offensive line, not only do I think they lacked a little bit of talent, they were put in bad situations, but let's face it, I mean, they going into training camp and losing your head coach, who some of them started to view as a bit of a father figure with Tony Sperano, completely unexpected death. And I think it really rocked, how they approached the beginning of the season. And, I think it was very hard for them to deal with that and pull out of it. And so I think that, this year, they have a few younger guys like Garrett Bradbury, Drew Samia. I think those guys are going to have to, Dennison's going to have an approach with them, which is a bit more studious and patient. Whereas a guy like Riley Reif, who's been around a long time, or Josh Klein, who's a veteran in the league and coming in and working for a starting spot, those guys I think you can get on a little bit more. But, so there's this mix of Riley Reif, who's now probably 8-year veteran in the league, and younger guys who you need to be a little bit more patient with. I think Dennison is good enough. He's been around long enough that he will adapt depending on which person you're dealing with on that offensive line.
And now that we know what the offensive line is going to look like, did they get enough help? Do they have enough good players?
I'm not really sure at this point. Bradbury, I think, is going to be a very good center. The athleticism that he shows and the ability to get in the right position quickly, I think he's very quick and fits this offense, what they want to do with the offensive line and the running game exactly to a T. Josh Klein, I think, is going to be really battling for that right guard spot, and I think eventually Drew Samia can come in there and give him some good competition. But it's so early in the process right now, and you're not going against guys who have pads on. I think it'll be a big step when Linval Joseph gets back on the practice field in full team situations where Garrett Bradbury and Josh Klein can go up against him. I think they did what they could under the salary cap constraints, which, another point that I want to bring up is we kind of take a look at everything they did in this offseason. They went after Anthony Barr hard and thought they lost him, got him back, but ultimately, is that trade-off going to be worth it? The salary that Barr is going to draw versus what you might have been able to get in free agency perhaps 2 offensive